What if I told you that Arnold Schwarzenegger's most mind-bending sci-fi film almost starred Patrick Swayze, required hundreds of gallons of slime, and was once considered unfilmable? Total Recall 1990 isn't just a cult classic, it's a bizarre production filled with behind-the-scenes chaos, wild casting choices, and effects that pushed filmmaking to its limit. Today, we're diving into weird facts about Total Recall that will change the way you see this sci-fi masterpiece. A decade in development, Total Recall didn't just appear out of nowhere. It spent nearly 10 years bouncing around Hollywood. The story, based loosely on Philip K. Dick's short tale We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, was purchased by producer Dino De Laurentiis in the late 1970s. But nobody could quite figure out how to make it. The futuristic setting, the surreal dream logic, and the violent action meant the budget was sky high for its time. Multiple writers tried adapting it, and countless directors passed. Studios kept shelving the project, calling it too ambitious or too confusing. For nearly a decade, Total Recall was Hollywood's definition of development hell. By the late 1980s, it seemed doomed to never happen until a superstar actor decided to step in and completely change its fate. Patrick Swayze's Mars. Believe it or not, Arnold Schwarzenegger was not the first choice to play Douglas Quaid. In fact, Patrick Swayze, fresh off the success of Dirty Dancing, was originally cast when the project was in development under De Laurentiis. His version of the film was going to be very different. Instead of the gritty industrial Mars we know today, the Red Planet was designed more like a dusty frontier town, leaning into Swayze's rugged cowboy charisma. Production even began building sets in Australia, but before filming could really start, De Laurentiis' company collapsed financially, leaving Swayze's version of Total Recall dead in the water. When Schwarzenegger later revived the film with Rekall Pictures, the entire look of Mars changed, shifting into a darker, more dystopian vision. Swayze's Total Recall might have looked more like a space western than a bloody sci-fi nightmare, but history had other plans. Arnold's last-minute save. When Total Recall was left abandoned, Arnold Schwarzenegger saw an opportunity. At the time, Arnold was one of the biggest stars in the world, fresh off The Terminator and Predator. He personally lobbied Rekall Pictures to buy the rights. His pitch was simple. He was the only actor who could make the film profitable. Once Rekall agreed, Arnold didn't just sign on as the star, he influenced nearly every part of the production. He demanded Paul Verhoeven, director of RoboCop, to helm the film, because he knew Verhoeven could balance action and satire. Arnold also insisted on a massive $60 million budget, unheard of for sci-fi at the time. Without his intervention, Total Recall would have likely stayed shelved forever. Instead, it became one of the most expensive films of its era, and a global box office hit. Cementing Schwarzenegger as more than just an action hero, he became a sci-fi legend. The X-rated cut. If you think Total Recall is violent now, you should have seen the original version. When Paul Verhoeven first submitted the film to the MPAA, it was slapped with an X rating, not for sex, but for extreme violence. The board demanded changes, pointing to multiple brutal deaths, lingering gore shots, and the infamous escalator shootout where a civilian is used as a human shield. Verhoeven trimmed tiny moments, mere seconds here and there, from at least 17 scenes. For example, the camera originally held longer on exploding heads, blood spray, and dismemberments. These cuts were enough to drop it down to an R rating. Interestingly, fans argue the uncut version isn't much different, but Verhoeven himself admitted he had to shave off the edges. The result? One of the bloodiest rated blockbusters of all time, but still just barely acceptable for theaters in 1990. Practical effects over CGI. Today, a movie like Total Recall would be filled with digital effects, but in 1990, CGI was in its infancy, so nearly everything was done with practical effects. That meant elaborate prosthetics, animatronics, and miniature models. The unforgettable scene where Quaid pulls a tracking device out of his nose, that was achieved with a grotesque animatronic head. The Martian landscapes? Many were built as detailed miniatures. Even the subway trains and futuristic cars were functioning props on massive sets. Special effects legend Rob Bottin, famous for his work on The Thing, led the creature and prosthetic team. His designs gave us mutants like Quado, grotesque body transformations, and oxygen-deprived faces bulging under Mars's atmosphere. The lack of CGI gives the film a raw, tactile quality. Even decades later, these practical effects hold up shockingly well, often looking more convincing than modern digital attempts. The escalator shootout. One of the most infamous action sequences in the film is the escalator shootout. During this scene, Quaid fires wildly in a crowded mall, while henchmen chase him. Over 200 squibs, tiny explosive blood packs, were used to simulate gunfire injuries. This was a massive number for one sequence, and the results are unforgettable. The brutality of civilians being gunned down shocked audiences, but it also became iconic of Verhoeven's style, mixing over-the-top violence with dark humor. The MPAA specifically flagged this scene as too extreme, forcing Verhoeven to cut away from certain blood splatters earlier than he wanted. Still, the carnage remains shocking today, especially compared to sanitized action movies of the era. What makes it even weirder? Many extras playing civilians weren't trained stunt performers, so Verhoeven had to carefully choreograph fake blood explosions around them to keep it safe. Kuato's slime supply. The mutant resistance leader Kuato is one of the strangest creations in sci-fi cinema. A psychic, parasitic figure who emerges from another man's stomach. Kuato was brought to life with a giant animatronic puppet. But here's the weird part. To keep Kuato looking alive, the crew coated him in slime, lots of slime. Reports say gallons of the sticky goo were used daily to maintain his glistening, unsettling appearance. Operating Kuato required a team of puppeteers working in perfect sync. One controlled facial movements, another handled the arms, while others managed breathing motions. It was such a complex system that shooting Kuato's scenes often took hours longer than planned. Combined with the slime, lights, and heat of the set, actors complained the puppet gave off a foul odor by the end of the day. Disturbing? Absolutely. Memorable? Without question. Real oxygen masks. The Mars decompression scenes are some of the most horrifying in the film, showing characters suffocating as their eyes bulge and faces swell grotesquely. Achieving this effect required complex prosthetics, animatronic heads, and, surprisingly, working oxygen systems to keep actors safe while trapped inside restrictive masks and prosthetic heads. The crew built functioning oxygen tanks directly into the props. Without these, performers could have passed out within minutes. The distorted faces were separate animatronic models designed to mimic the actors' features while grotesquely exaggerating them. These puppets were so convincing that audiences at the time thought they might actually be makeup applied directly to Arnold and Rachel Ticotin. The result was terrifyingly effective, and another reminder of how committed the filmmakers were to practical, in-camera effects rather than digital shortcuts. A psychic ending? One of the enduring debates about Total Recall is whether the entire story is real or just a dream implanted in Quaid's mind. But here's a twist. Some early drafts of the script suggested Quaid actually had latent psychic powers. Instead of being just a construction worker with false memories, he might have truly been special, someone whose mind could influence reality. These unused ideas would have shifted the film even further into surreal, mind-bending territory. Paul Verhoeven decided against it, preferring the more ambiguous ending that leaves audiences questioning everything. To this day, fans argue over the final scene. Did Quaid really save Mars? Or was it all the fantasy he purchased from Rekall? The psychic version was never filmed, but the traces of that concept linger, adding fuel to one of sci-fi's greatest cinematic debates: inspiration for The Matrix. When you think of memory manipulation, alternate realities, and questioning what's real, you might immediately think of The Matrix, but long before Neo chose the red pill, Total Recall was exploring similar themes. The Wachowskis have cited Total Recall along with other Philip K. Dick-inspired works as a major influence on their storytelling. The film's combination of brutal action and existential questions about reality laid the groundwork for later sci-fi classics. Even visual cues, like distorted cityscapes, mirror elements later used in The Matrix. While Total Recall was campier and bloodier, its DNA can be seen in almost every modern simulation versus reality movie. Without Quaid's trip to Rekall, it's possible Neo's journey into the digital world might never have existed in quite the same way. So, the next time you revisit Total Recall, remember, it's not just a Schwarzenegger classic. It's a film that nearly didn't exist, went through radical changes, relied on gallons of slime, and left an impact that echoes through science fiction to this day.